The fourth piece of all this is diplomatic. Diplomatic means working with your allies. Now that sounds good. That's very simple if they all wear coats and ties and speak English. It's not so simple if they are all jailbirds from Cairo that you're sending to Afghanistan. But in fact, the decision was that we're going to turn Afghanistan into the Soviets' Vietnam. And to do that, we got in bed with some very bad guys who are now giving us a very hard time, the law of unintended consequences. But in 1982, Afghanistan is going to become the Soviet Vietnam, and we're going to do that by turning to the Mujahideen and arming them, and that's the way it turned out. The fifth piece of all this plan was information warfare. The Voice of America was no longer just going to give weather reports, it is going to talk to the Soviet people. Reagan's evil empire speech was not aimed at the people in Florida where he gave the speech. It was aimed at the younger generation behind the Iron Curtain to tell them we are not going to continually put up with an illegitimate government. We are going to prevail. And it really was interesting 10 years later when writing this book to go talk to those who were then teenagers, who are now middle-agers, to talk about how the evil empire speech cut through the Iron Curtain like a hot knife through butter. They heard it, and it's what led a whole generation to say, you know, we don't have to put up with this forever. And so the bottom line, of course, is to define victory. If you're going to get in a fight, you better think through the exit strategy. Why are you doing this, and how are you going to end it? And the objective, we decided, is not burning down Berlin. It was not tanks in the Red Square. Victory in the Cold War was defined, and NSDD 32 came right out of Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. The objective of this plan is to force the Soviet government to seek the consent of the governed, meaning let's have some elections. And every time Mr. Gorbachev wanted something, it's fine, when are you going to have an election? And pretty soon, Boris Yeltsin had been elected president of Russia, and pretty soon they were having elections, and pretty soon Lithuania was declaring independence, and the empire came apart. It came apart really in the summer of '91, which is an amazing moment, because the summer of '91 there was an attempted coup. The hardliners realized the empire was coming apart, and therefore they attempted a coup. You may recall Gorbachev was down in Crimea in his cabin, the Dasha. Yeltsin was outside the White House in the Parliament, standing on top of a tank. Mr. Vanayev, who was the vice president, was in the Kremlin holding a press conference, looking very shaky, looking like he needed a drink, which he did. And in Washington, we were really sweating bullets, because the question is, who's got the Cheget? Who's got the briefcase that will release nuclear weapons? Because who has the capability of firing nuclear shots? They're not going to take a shot at the U.S., but one contender for power may take a shot at the other. And that would be very bad news, because once one goes off, a lot of bad things begin to happen automatically. 10 years later, when I talked to the generals working at the General Staff, I discovered a most amazing thing. In the summer of 1991, the Soviet General Staff did not trust their political leaders any more than we did. And therefore, in the August of '91, the Soviet General Staff simply disconnected all the nuclear forces. Now you can imagine how many court-martials would have followed if in fact things hadn't worked out. But it did. But those guys had the courage to say, this is serious, we know the Americans, they're not going to do dumb things, and the Soviet General Staff disconnected the nuclear weapons at the time of the coup, and basically that marked the beginning of the end of the empire. That's why when I wrote this book, I wrote a dedication at the beginning, which I would like to read to you, because I feel very strongly about what it says. To the cold warriors, who did their duty, protected their honor, and defended their countries. They did so with a vengeance in the service of their own gods, but they never lost their respect for the fires of hell that would surely follow any careless act at the edge of the abyss. Thank you. Jim was supposed to come up here and yank me off the stage if you want to chat some more, or we'll drink coffee. And I wrote a book about all this that my dear wife has some of. So anything you'd like to ask about all that history? Till Jim gets here? Okay, here comes relief. You can all go to the bathroom. We're of the age we need to know when that happens.
Any questions for Tom?
Somebody asked, is he writing another book?
Am I writing another book? Well, I wrote a successor book called The Nuclear Express, which is a political history of nuclear weapons, with a gentleman from Los Alamos, Danny Stillman, who had been chief of intelligence there for 14 years. And it is a political history of nuclear weapons, no equations, lots of history, lots of how the technology spreads and so forth. I may write another, thinking about writing fiction, but I have to, because it's easier, it doesn't have to be true and you don't have to get it security cleared. Thank you all for having me. It's really wonderful to be here. Sally, I'll see you at my next speech.
You've got a question back
No,
there.
excuse me. Okay.
I have a question, and it's just because of the viewpoint you had at that time. Do you have any, or could you comment on the 1970, early 1970, the Black September movement, and what went on between the Syrians and the Palestinians and the Jordanians?
Not really. That whole part of the world is a mysterious part, and I know a lot about nukes, but the carryings on in the Arab world is a whole other world. I'm really not familiar with that. Yes, sir.
What role do you think nuclear weapons now play in the world?
Well, what role do nuclear weapons play? I think it is very important to understand they do play a role. That there are John Kennedy, some of you heard me say yesterday, became president 50 years ago. He feared 15 or 20 nuclear states. There were only 9. That's because non-proliferation efforts have worked. We have rolled back the nuclear genie in several places. But nuclear weapons, not only do they deter people like Iran once they get nuclear weapons, but they also provide an extended deterrence in that they deter Japan, Germany, South Korea from developing nuclear weapons. And those who say we ought to just throw all our nukes in the sea need to bear in mind Japan and South Korea are not going to sit there right next to China without nuclear weapons. And if we abandon nukes, you can be sure that Sony will be cranking them out within 6 months. They have the capability to do that. South Korea and Japan are very sophisticated places. They got reactors. And so the role of nuclear weapons, no, we don't need 30,000 or 10,000. But you do need a few thousand. You need to make absolutely sure that they will work if the president thinks they need to. They deter terrorist nations or irresponsible nations, but they also deter industrial nations that could go nuclear from doing so. Terribly important. Yes, sir.
That the president of Iran recently announced that they are a nuclear state because they've acquired enough enriched uranium. What's sort of your view and opinion on that whole situation?
Well, Iran is a very interesting place. You know, Iran is not Arab, it's Persian. As the Brits withdrew from the Middle East, Nixon understood that Persia, Iran, could be the regional power, and that's what they want to be. In looking at Iran, I think you have to look at them as we did the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It's a very corrupt nomenclatura using their religion to keep themselves in power and to keep their rice bowl full. The mullahs in Iran are not great holy men of the cloth. They are very wealthy crooks. They have been skimming oil revenues for 10 years. Mr. Rafsanjani, the former president of Iran, is a billionaire. And the younger generation understands all that. And so to go in and bomb Natanz and so forth, not a good idea. The leadership is corrupt, it is old, the younger generation understands that, that they clearly have a nuclear weapons program. Whether they're going to get that anytime soon, they want to, but you know, as you people know more than perhaps any other audience, getting fissile materials is not simple. And that's quite a challenge. I don't think Iran is there yet. I mean, they're producing gram quantities of HEU, but in fact, you need, you know, 100 pounds of it. Okay, thank you for having me. It was wonderful to be here.